Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good. Wasn't that an amazing program last night? Yeah, it was really wonderful. Thanks for putting that on. And speaking of synchronicities at this event, it was a very meaningful coincidence for me last night, because last week I had traveled and I went to get my dad. So my father was with me last night, and my mom passed about 4 years ago. And so he's been traveling between all the siblings, and he's now probably going to be staying here in California with me for a while. Of course, it's the most beautiful place. So, and so I brought him with me last night, and again, it was no random thing that two of the poems happened to be about father. So I thought that was really sweet and very meaningful for both of us. So, and again, very meaningful for him in the sense that he's an immigrant and shared many of the experiences of what the event was about last night. So, yeah, it was great. So what we'll do with our time is we're going to talk a little bit and have a conversation about intention and synchronicity, and my passion being a physician and working at the center and seeing how consciousness shows up in the physiology, in the mind-body physiology, and in our experience. And so, we'll talk about that and how it can show up in different ways in our biology. But before we do that, I was hoping, because it is kind of fun, even though once you access that non-local domain and you're meditating regularly every day, you do, and you become more self-aware, you do notice these messages from the universe and all of these synchronicities that occur in your life. And although maybe we shouldn't be surprised, I always get a little excited when little things like that happen. And it's fun, for us to share those stories with each other. So I was hoping before we dive into some of the slides that I had that you could share one of your most impactful or meaningful synchrodestiny experiences, and then I'll share one of mine.
Okay, my life is always synchronistic, so it'll be difficult to choose one, but let me share with you an experience that occurred when I wrote the book on synchronicity. For those of you who are from another country, the book is called Synchrodestiny in Other Countries. It's called Spontaneous Fulfillment of Desire in this country, and I think it was 2004 that it was published, but you'll have to look it up. I don't remember dates. So I had just finished the book, and I was in Durham, North Carolina, and I had to go to Austin for my next talk. And I was on the plane from Durham to Houston to switch, because there was no direct flight. And all the while, next to me there was a gentleman who had a little alcohol in his breath, and he was fast asleep all the while. So when we landed in Houston, I think it was Houston, or the other big airport. Anyway, he was on his phone, and I thought he was speaking to his wife, and he was saying that the plane was slightly late and he would be there soon, etc., etc. I was also on the phone talking to my executive assistant, Carolyn, and she was telling me on the phone, oh, by the way, the book's on the New York Times bestseller list. Congratulations. And I was thanking her, and obviously he overheard me. So as we both started to get off the plane, he said, so you're an author, huh? I said, yeah. He said, what do you write, fiction or non-fiction? I said, both. It's, all non-fiction is also fiction. So he said, huh? So as I was stepping off the plane, he said, oh, by the way, good luck. I said, thanks. So that was that. And, we had a 2-hour layover. And after that, I took the commuter plane, and by coincidence, he was sitting next to me again. So as soon as the plane took off, he said, my wife is asking me to buy this book for her, and I don't know if I have time to go to the bookstore, etc. I said, what's it called? He says, Spontaneous something or the other. So I took it out of my bag. I said, what's your wife's name? He said, why do you want to know my wife's name? I said, because this is the book she wants. And so I signed it. He said, it's Jane. And I signed it, and he looked at the book. He looked at the back page, and he saw my picture. And he looked at me. He said, what's it about? I said, it's about what is happening to us right now. And he said, oh. And then he went back to sleep. Okay. So a very good metaphor for the fact that it's happening all the time, but we're asleep. Right? He was literally asleep. It's just an interesting story. But there are many. Everyone here is here because of a series of coincidences. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. It's the nature of experience. All experience is a result of coincidence. We just don't wake up to it. If you wake up to it, you'll see it's all everything. And so you shouldn't say just a coincidence. Synchronicity or meaningful coincidence is a good word. It's another word for the creativity of the universe. Okay? And because you're part of it, then the creativity is inherent in every experience. Not yours, not your ego's, but that of what we call the universe.
Great, thanks. That's a great story. So I'll just share one. Again, I'm realizing again as time goes on that everything about our experience is this sort of synchronicity of events. But one story about just how I got here, and I didn't know it at the time, and as we often don't, all of these things are happening and in synchrony. But when I had not necessarily heard of Deepak or read any of his books until it was 1994 probably, 93 or 94. And I was going to be getting married and was going through a traditional Vedic ceremony. So the person that was doing the ceremony, he was actually a PhD in psychology, but also a Brahmin. And so he did ceremonies and one of my uncles knew him. So he said he would be great because he can explain each of the things that you're doing in English. And, because growing up here, it's nice for people to understand the ceremony. So before the ceremony, he wanted to meet with both of us, and I just knew him sort of peripherally. So we went to his home, and as soon as we walked in, he knew we were medical students. So I was a fourth-year medical student at the time, and of course, this conversation was not at all part of medical training. And so we walked into the house, and he said, "Oh, come here, come into he was in the living room, and he picked up a book, and he said, do you know this doctor, Dr. Deepak Chopra? And I was like, no, I've never heard of him. And he said, well, you have to read this book. And it was Ageless Body, Timeless Mind. And he said, this is amazing, it's fantastic, it explains everything, and this is the way medicine should be. So I said, okay, when a Vedic priest tells you to read something, you should read something. And so after that, however, I was a med student and I went to used bookstores. So I went to a used bookstore and I'm like, okay, let me see. I knew he had written other books. And I found Quantum Healing and then Creating Health. So I bought those two, and those were the first books that I had read. And of course, at the time when I read them, I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing, and this is how medicine should be. And I was just kind of launching my whole medical career and was very excited about that. But then, of course, I started residency and my training, and nobody was talking about those things. So it kind of ended up on the back burner. But I think that was some sort of seed, right, of intention that had some sort of self-organizing qualities about that. And I didn't necessarily have a specific intention, and sometimes that's the best, right? You just have this intention that that's how I want to do things, that's how I want to practice medicine. And that was about 25 years ago. And so sometimes letting go as well and letting the universe self-organize, you never know how it's going to show up. And then there were multiple synchronicities that occurred to get me here. But I think that was the start of it. And so we all, again, have these interesting stories to share with each other. So maybe later you can share them with each other, because it's kind of fun. All right, so what we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about is this concept of intention and how it shows up in the biology and some of the science and mechanisms that we're showing how that shows up in the biology. And again, science, as Deepak had mentioned, is never going to fully explain these phenomenon because it's just a construct. But it's kind of fun, to look at how consciousness shows up when we're in flow. So we'll just start. Do I have a clicker here? Yeah. With the first slide here, I think, is just to bring up the point that what our intentions are and where they're coming from is really, interestingly, in Ayurveda, the root of the mind is in the heart. And so, as Deepak had mentioned, that's the spirit talking, right, through art and through our heart, as opposed to what we're thinking in our minds. And the root is in the heart, but the mind is in every cell in the body. And how we measure that in science is electrically, and even in spontaneous fulfillment of desire. In the book, you have a nice chart of what local mind and the qualities of the local mind and non-local. And when non-local, the consciousness is flowing, it shows up in the autonomic nervous system, so these automatic functions of the body that are synchronized, as well as the endocrine system. And so this is how, when we're connecting to that non-local, that what we see is moving us more toward a state of balance and health. And then it can emanate around us because we create this, we're accessing this field that then affects everything around us. And so it's very important to put attention on, what emotions you have in your heart. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's a beautiful diagram. Mm-hmm. May I use it in some of my talks? Okay. So if you understand the science of forces in nature, there are 4 forces that scientists talk about. One is the electromagnetic field of the universe. So the whole universe is an magnetic field. It pervades all of what we call space-time. The second force, so what is electromagnetism? It's electricity and magnetism. And they're the same thing, okay? This light is coming as a result of electrical and magnetic emanations from the filament, which is heated up. So electricity and magnetism are the same thing. They're just the same field, perpendicular to each other. When you have a magnet, perpendicular to it is an electrical field. In fact, you can generate an electrical field by moving a magnet, okay? So that's one force. The second force is called the strong force, and it holds the nucleus of an atom together. And you blow it, you get an explosion called an atomic explosion. So it's very strong, the force. And it's in an atom. That's it. The third force is called the weak force, or the weak interaction. It what causes radioactive decay. So now for almost 100 years, with equations, mathematical equations, experiments, scientists have quote-unquote unified these 3 forces. So they're the same thing. Electricity, magnetism, the strong force and the weak force are the same. The strong and weak forces are at the atomic level. Electromagnetic fields pervade the universe. So there's one force left, and that's called gravity, and I'll talk about it maybe elsewhere. And that scientists are having a difficult time to unify with the other forces. So, according to Einstein's general theory of relativity, that may not be a force at all. Gravity, even though we think of it as a force, it's holding you to the ground, and it puts the, planets and stars all in their place, and the earth is spinning on its axis and going around the sun, and the moon is going around the earth. That's gravity. But why do scientists today think that's not one of these is that Einstein came up with mathematical equations. That's how these physicists do science, through math, and basically proved, and now everyone accepts that gravity is just the curvature of space and time. Now that's very difficult to visualize because neither space nor time are visible entities. We experience them. We experience space here right now, and we experience time, but they're not things that are visible as forces. So curvature of space-time, that's how gravity is explained. There's a famous expression, space-time tells mass how to move, and mass tells space-time how to curve. So it may not be one of these entities. It's just the way the universe behaves once it's manifest. Okay? Why is this important? Because then your body is an electromagnetic field and it's generating this from the heart, but it's part of the electromagnetic field of the universe. And this is you and as an activity of the universe. And so at this level, we are connected at all of us. Right now, everyone in this room. By the way, tomorrow, when I'm not here in the afternoon, Punacha is going to demonstrate with technology how you can measure the electromagnetic field right in this room before, during, after meditation. So, you say, I went to this holy shrine and I felt peace, or I went to, this football game and I felt chaos. That's all because of the electromagnetic field that's connecting all of us. And we're using it in our technology, right? You send people email, text messages, photos, videos, radio messages, all part of the electromagnetic field. But at a deeper level, we transcend that field too. So at the deepest level, it's not that everything is connected, it's the same. There's no need for connection. It's all at once, everything. That's when we transcend. So that we can call a consciousness field, for lack of a better word. And that in that is prior to space-time. It's more fundamental than space-time. That's where everything is inseparable. It's not connected. And scientists, not all scientists, but people like Larry Dossey, etc., are very interested in consciousness. They say that at that level, what is called coincidence or non-local communion, or if you want to use the word communication, it's not a good word, but communion, because it's all at once. The correlations are unmediated, unmitigated, and instantaneous. Unmediated means there's no signal. I could be in a Faraday chamber, and you could be in a Faraday chamber in New York, which means no signal can go from me to you. I couldn't send you a text message or an email if I'm in a Faraday chamber, and yet at the level of consciousness and awareness, we would be connected. So unmediated means without signal. Unmitigated means that the robustness, the strength of the correlation does not diminish with distance in space-time. So you could be in this room, I could be in the other room, and or I could be in here, you could be in New York, and or maybe on the moon. the strength of the correlation would not diminish with distance in space, which also means it wouldn't diminish with distance in time. So past, future, and present are also correlated. So that's real coincidence. It's what I was trying to get to yesterday with the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen equation. Your question determines the answer here, but also elsewhere. You tickle the universe here, it laughs everywhere at the same time. Unmediated, unmitigated, instantaneous. Now that's real correlation beyond space-time even. And there are experiments now that are being done to prove that.
Yeah, and actually there's some interesting studies and observations in biology, like in other animals. And when I was just recently reading was talking about hares, like rabbits, and onyx, different types of animals, that when there's drought conditions perhaps in one area and another area of the globe, but they're obviously not in close proximity, that the number of what happens with that population correlates from one place to another instantaneously.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And the point of this diagram particularly is that any time you feel even slight distress, and you're maybe in an airplane or maybe, at an airport or something, you don't have time to meditate. You can just put your attention here and you'll be to some level connected.
Absolutely.
Because this is the pacemaker.
Exactly. Yeah. So the heart's an amazing organ that it's differentiated in the sense from other cells in the body that it creates its own electricity. And so then when we have a thought or emotion and we're focusing on the heart, and my next slide kind of gives us a visual of what happens when we do that, that can, again, when we're in this world and we're interacting and our ego mind is going, we do have experiences of distress or dis-ease, but we can shift that. So just a personal story related to that. Again, in the last week, I had flown to help move my dad over here, and after my mom had passed, we all love our families, but there are challenges as well. And my sister had somewhat different ideas about how things should go over the last several years. And although we get along, there were certain things that were creating some tension that I was, in sometimes we're tempted to go through the mind and intellectualize with each other and why you shouldn't be thinking that and why you should think what I'm thinking. And so instead of doing that, I was anticipating ahead of time of this trip. When we meditate loving, compassionate heart, I thought, we're all stressed. This is stressful. We've all had loss. I'm just going to focus on compassion. So loving, compassionate heart. So for some time before I left, and that entire week I was there, we just focus on my heart and just think compassion, compassion, compassion. And especially times when you're feeling a little turbulent, that's just a really great exercise to do. And the week went very effortlessly. Now, whether or not that had to do with it, I believe that helped. But I think that can shift what is happening in the environment. As we'll see tomorrow, we can affect this electromagnetic field around us. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with our thoughts. It's, what you're projecting through the heart. So let's see what happens.
So, Renee, this is really good stuff. I hope you're recording it. Are we? Okay.
So this,
I didn't know what she was going to talk about, but this is good.
I'm glad. So this is interesting, just as again, ways of measuring what's happening. I think it's kind of fun to look, and there are many organizations that are looking at this electric field, when we shift the heart. Heart Math is one of them, which I took these slides from. But we talk about heart rate variability as a measurement of our automatic nervous system. And the interesting thing they've done, and we know when we calm down, and in the next slide, the blue one I'm going to magnify because it's very interesting. We can take deep breaths, which you'll be experiencing tomorrow. Breathing is my favorite tool for just shifting that autonomic nervous system from stress mode to from sympathetic to parasympathetic. and again, in the language of consciousness, I feel like when we're in that activity and sympathetic and we're thinking, we're really obstructing that flow. And when we can calm down the mind-body system, then consciousness is flowing, more in flow with us. But the interesting thing is we can calm ourselves down, but it's a little different than when we bring in a positive emotion or thought. So on the one slide on the bottom left, you can see that there's a certain pattern to the heart rate going up and down. But then the line in the middle is when you have someone just think appreciation. And you can use any emotion. They used appreciation, gratitude. I was using compassion. I'm sure if I had monitors on myself, what you would see is you start to go into what's called coherence. So, it's a little bit more synchronized, the ups and downs of the waves. And what happens when you're in synchrony isn't just that you're relaxed and your body's less stressed, but in the blue slide on the right side, you can see that's called global synchronization. And what that means is the entire body and all the cells in the body are in synchrony. And the top right graph is just relaxation. So if you were just relaxed, your nervous system calms down, but you're not really in the best synchrony where all of the cells in the body are functioning together. And that's that spike you see when you start to think appreciation or compassion or whatever it is, some positive emotion, and then you see a spike in a certain frequency where every cell is functioning optimally. And that's been associated with well-being. And so, again, when you shift and you connect to that non-local awareness or non-local field, then things start to automatically synchronize and work together. Yes.
So again, very interesting. So the most fundamental activity of consciousness, awareness, sentient beings, is what we call knowing, right? Not only do you know that you're here, you also know that you exist. But so does everything else. A tree has a knowing, not in the way we use words in English, but it senses its environment. It knows what's happening in its environment, then it responds to that. So that's true of bacteria, that's true of all living entities that are, in a sense, species of consciousness with knowing. They know. Even a paramecium knows what's happening around it. And that knowing then translates to the first experience. So knowing is a form of sensing, just basic sensing. But then the second element of knowing is what we call feeling. At a rudimentary level in other life forms, it's just, is this pleasurable or painful? Or is this feels good, doesn't feel good? That's it. Okay. In us, it becomes emotion. So, we become, the higher feelings are compassion, love, joy, appreciation, gratitude, etc. But it's prevalent in all life forms at a rudimentary level. Bird navigation, now we know, as a result of the electromagnetic fields, the bird's brain tunes into the electromagnetic field, and the seasons change, they know exactly where to go, so they can breed, they can reproduce. Even butterflies, if you've heard of monarch butterflies, they start from Massachusetts and they go all across the United States, they go down the coast of California, end up in Mexico, and then they reproduce there, and the next, when the season changes, they go back to where their ancestors came from, and frequently the same tree, from where an ancestor came. And people can now monitor this. So all life forms are already doing this. And our feeling level, therefore, is more sophisticated than even our perceptual experience. In fact, our perceptual experience, this is, you're experiencing this right now. this is perception, that is the third stage after the feeling. Is this okay to be in this room? Or should I, move somewhere else as a biological organism? And the last thing is thought. Thought is the interpretation of all this. So that's why at a fundamental level you trust or feel your way into the world rather than think your way into the world. Thinking will always separate you. That's what the mistake of the intellect is. So feeling and knowing are closer.
Yeah, it was interesting. I've been doing a little re-landscaping in my yard, and we put in, it's called a butterfly bush. It's the pretty little flowers. And the next day, these monarchs were all flying around it, so they knew it was there.
They felt their way there.
They felt it. Yeah, it's really, yeah. So, just put attention on your heart and bring in a positive emotion, and you'll immediately shift your field. So I thought this was a study we did, and it has an interesting, the next graph I'll show my theory on intention or connecting at the non-local level. But how many people have done seduction of spirit? Was anyone in this study where we put all the monitors on you and everything? Okay, it was a couple. Oh, were you? Oh, awesome. So this is about you. This was an interesting collaboration we did with Scripps Translational Research Institute here in San Diego, where we had all this wireless equipment, which since then is even more, our technology is advancing to the point where we're really able to do so much now wirelessly. But we had EEG monitors on people that were fairly light, and you could still meditate with them on, and then a little small monitor on the thumb so we could monitor blood pressure, heart rate, and measurements of the autonomic nervous system. And there were many interesting things we found. Blood pressure goes down when you meditate, etc., which there are many studies that have reproduced that. And immediately when you start meditating, even if you're a new meditator, your electric field, the electromagnetic field of your brain also immediately shifts. So even if you don't feel like there's anything going on, there's definitely things happening. But I wanted to highlight this one slide because it's interesting as far as what I think is going on. But the left is a new meditator. So the top blue line is blood pressure, the middle line is your heart rate, and then the green line down below is your respiratory rate or the breathing rate, which we were measuring as well. So you can see this was a new meditator. The one on the right is an experienced meditator, so someone who had been meditating regularly, then came to do a retreat. And, some things are obvious, like the regular meditator immediately when, so you can see the lines are a little bit high, and then the second white line over is when the meditation starts. We did a little bit of breathing before meditation, so things start to calm down, the blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate. And then the middle section is when we were meditating, just like you were just now. And then, the white line sort of on the right when things start, going up is when the chime, the bell rang. So one interesting thing that this was actually brought up recently by a guest. I was showing this at Perfect Health, and they said, well, it's interesting, if you look at the experienced meditator on the right, even a few minutes before the chime, there's, and this was our interpretation together, that perhaps there was some connection non-locally with the person leading the meditation, and their physiology is starting to shift before the chime, and so, although sometimes I know when I lead meditation, you're paying attention, there might be a little bit of noise, or you're checking where the chime is. Timing-wise, it was definitely before that would happen. And, as we know, there are experiments where you can, especially people who are meditating together, connect non-locally, and the physiology responds to that.
Yeah, so that's a great insight. There are other experiments that have been done by a very well-known neuroscientist, Libet. And what he shows is that even before you become conscious of an intention, your brain already responds before you have the conscious intention. So if I told you, lift your arm up, and you do this, that's an intention, right? But your brain will actually record that intention before you consciously have the intention. Now, many scientists have argued against free will on this basis, that, intention is not coming from you. It's a result of all the experiences you've had, which are correlated, etc. But these arguments are very fallacious, depending on your bias. Is the universe, or do we have free will, or do we have choice? We have the experience that we have choice, right? So we cannot deny that we have the experience. But what does create that choice? In the Vedic tradition, we would say karma is all the conditioning of the past. So we do have choice, and yet there is an element of determinism, because karma influences the choice we have. Now, that's not the case if you are constantly in what can be called the state of being. In the state of being, there's no choice, choiceless awareness. That's actually perfect synchronicity, because as soon as you have an intention, you have, in a way, introduced something personal into the coherence of the universe. So the moment you make an intention, you actually moved away from reality, which is choiceless awareness, being, where all is synchronistic. In that level of being, this anticipation, non-local correlation can occur. So here's the moral of all this is that don't force your intentions on the universe. Okay? Don't tell God what to do. Okay? Don't force your... The best way to activate a subtle intention is to ask a question. Okay? What is the best outcome of the present situation that I'm struggling with? And then leave it. The question will determine the answer. And so that's why, we say, what do I want? What's my purpose? What am I grateful for? These are questions. And once you move away from your habitual certainty, which is habit, really, and comes from karma, you surrender to uncertainty. That's the meaning, really, to surrender to, and you live in a subtle intention rather than a forced intention, then synchronicity is going to happen. Okay, so it's better to say, ask, what do I want? Or what's the best outcome? Or what do we want? You can do it at many levels. But ask the question, let it go. That is the most subtle way to harness the organizing power of intention.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because a question that comes up a lot is with intention. And sometimes people are doing all of these things and they have intentions and that doesn't manifest. So, and you brought up karma. Of course, that's, part of that surrendering to that. So what's your answer when people say, well, I have my vision board and I'm writing down my intentions every day and I'm doing all of this and something happens or doesn't happen that I would like to?
Let go of your idea of how things should be, knowing that the universe has bigger plans. That's a way to surrender to uncertainty. So this is it seems almost paradoxical. You want something and at the same time you let go of the outcome and surrender to uncertainty, because that's how it works. That's why in Sanskrit the word for the intention is sankalpa. Sankalpa is very subtle. It's not, and we are using sankalpa all the time, right? If I walk from here to there, I'm not telling my muscles, these ones, the glutes, you better contract. And, and these muscles, you better relax. Okay? We just have the intention and then walking occurs, right? And it's not even at the level of thought. It's very subtle. Similarly, when you go to sleep at night, unless you're an insomniac, you don't say, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. You have an intention. You move your bowels, that's the same thing, unless, you have an obstruction. You have an intention. So your body is responding to subtle intention. In fact, your body is the sum total of subtle intention. That's what the autonomic nervous system is. And especially by the way, how many people went to yoga this morning with Eddie? How was that? Amazing, right? He's an amazing yoga therapist. So, subtle intention is already working in your body as the autonomic nervous system. When there's intention at a very subtle level that I don't want to have this experience anymore that we call the body, that's called death. Okay, subtle intention says, let it go now, because you need to renew yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge, but the biggest lesson is to, sort of have a direction or have some sense, ask the question, what do I want, but with detachment. Yeah, definitely. All right, so again, with this slide too, I just wanted to point out, I want to go back and look at all of because we had multiple people who are regular meditators versus the new ones and see if we see that pattern in all of them. So that's my plan. But the novice meditator, you'll see it's a little different pattern. The heart rate, the middle line, there's some little bit of increase toward the end, but certainly not the other two look very different. So again, do your daily meditation as you tap into that non-local more and more and more, you start to sustain these levels of physiology, and then when you meditate, you can, drop down into this more, the parasympathetic nervous system, where consciousness is more, allowed to flow more synchronously. So this slide, we show a lot of just as far as, again, what I think of this is a slide to demonstrate our epigenetics, or that we actually can modulate which genes are turned on or off, or up or down. And what we're finding with science and with a lot of studies is that when we meditate, when we do mind-body practices, that the expression, and I like to think of this again as how does consciousness, create this physiology when we are not in our thoughts and, calming down the system, that it tends to be genes that that are more for wellness, and turning down genes that relate to chronic disease or that cause chronic illness. And there are many factors, including lifestyle, that affect this. But I think probably more than anything, our thoughts and emotions drive the epigenetic mechanisms. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but this is a beautiful slide too. Actually, I'm also using this right now. I got it from you. So you see those blue balls? Those are proteins that are called epigenes, okay? They're above the genes. And you see DNA is wrapped around those proteins, okay? So think of my wrist here, and then DNA is wrapped around this. It's wrapped around this. Now, thoughts, emotions, feelings, images, we have images when we think of something, sensations and perceptions are entangled. They're all actually different modifications of consciousness, right? So when you change a thought, you change everything. And when you see these blue balls, what happens is some of the genes are close to each other, some are far away from each other. So just by modulating the epigenetic markers, chemical methylation, etc., you change the activity of the genes, which means some genes are close to each other, they influence each other. Some are far, so they don't influence each other as much. Bottom line is your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings are actually modulating the activity of genes. Think of them as light switches in this room. and you could turn off some of the lights and turn on some other lights, or if you had a dimmer, you could increase the intensity of the light or diminish the intensity. So every experience is doing that. Right now it's happening in your body. Okay, so if there was a fire alarm suddenly, and if it was real, your genes would immediately change their behavior, to prepare you for fight or flight, or, leave the room. Adrenaline would go up, cortisol would go up. But before that, the gene has to be activated, because ultimately it's the gene that controls the activity of the cell. So this is brilliant insight that we didn't have, like even less than 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we didn't learn any of this. Again, it was more the gene model of, this is a gene, it creates a protein, it has a specific function, that reductionist approach to genetics, which is really not the case at all. And the interesting thing about epigenetics isn't just, that we're affected by our own thoughts and emotions, but a lot of the research is showing that it's affected by a lot of the shape of our DNA, and which genes are showing up and which aren't, which ones are close together and aren't, are affected by our intrauterine and even maternal, paternal environment, emotions before they even produced the cells that you showed.
Before you're born. So in animals, that can be shown several generations, up to maybe even 7 generations, that you can actually show it. So past, future, and present are also entangled, what we call past, present, and future. And yet the beauty of this is that when we are close to the level of being or choiceless awareness, sankalpa, or subtle intention, reverberates throughout the system. This morning I was looking at our base camp, the inflammation. We have a project that Sheila and I are involved with, a global project to decrease inflammation in the world. So we are looking at all the data. And it's very obvious that you say liver, kidney, brain, genes, epigenetics, thoughts, intentions, feelings, perceptions. It's all one thing. I think if you want to understand the basis of reality, you just have to remember that you, or what you call me, and the entire universe is consciousness, period. One sentence. You and the entire universe is non-local consciousness. That's all there is. Now it shows up as a flower or a book or a microphone or this body. Those are symbolic expressions of consciousness. Those are symbols of consciousness. What we call everyday reality is not reality, it's a symbolic representation of reality. And reality is you as consciousness.
Just since you brought up that inflammation project, there's another little story I'll share of synchronicity. We had a meeting, when it was just yesterday in the morning, about this inflammation project, and we've been trying to, one of our initiatives is to find good biomarkers, consistent, reproducible, easy to measure for inflammation in the body. And so this has been on my mind and my thoughts for several weeks, and we had this big discussion about it just yesterday morning. And then as soon as the meeting was over, I had to go see some patients, and the third or fourth patient I saw that day, who's someone who doesn't come in that often. She doesn't like to access, unless she needs, which is good, the medical system. She was there for her physical, just to have her yearly physical and maybe do some labs, talk about, stress. And things that are going on in her life. So she wasn't someone I would have expected to ask this question, because she doesn't necessarily want to do a lot of labs or things. But I'm sitting there with her, and we're talking about labs, and let's do some labs and look at cholesterol and, the things we look at. And she says, somebody mentioned to me recently, and I wondered, do you think I should get a CRP? And this was an inflammatory marker that we've been talking about measuring in people. And that question doesn't come up very often for me, from a patient. Sometimes I might recommend it. And also this particular person was probably, if someone would have asked me, one of the last people I would have expected to ask for it. So it was a little synchronicity there.
So we should talk a little bit about our project, okay? Sure. Chopra Foundation has been doing a lot of this research. Sheila is part of it. And then we have Paul Mills. We have a young cell biologist, Christine, and we have two other researchers, Ryan and Bill. So Ryan is an archivist, a librarian, and one of the best in the world. He used to work for Wikipedia till he realized that Wikipedia is all nonsense, and he came and started working for the foundation. And then Bill is an MIT, Harvard anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, but also biological anthropologist. So between me, Sheila, Paul, Christine, Bill, Ryan, and Punacha, because he's technology, he's the best, I think. We got on this idea that inflammation is the number one factor in every disease. Only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant, which means 95% of chronic illness, cancer, heart disease, strokes, autoimmune illnesses, there's low-grade inflammation in the background. So a few months ago, some of our philanthropist friends said, if there's one thing you would like to do for the rest of your life, what would it be from a biological standpoint? We said it would be to decrease inflammation in the world. Inflammation includes inflammatory emotions, right? Hostility, anger, resentment, all this is inflammation. And it causes inflammation in the brain, in the body, and now we know the basis of it. So why do we have inflammation at all? It's a protective response. If you injure yourself, you don't bleed to death because inflammation protects you. But when you have chronic low-grade inflammation, it causes disease. And so, we went to some of our philanthropist friends and we said, war, terrorism, climate change, social injustice, economic injustice, everything could be understood if we understood inflammation. And all we have to do is come up with a slogan, and that would be cool it. Okay? And at every level. And so this meeting we had yesterday, 3 hours, was to discuss how do you monitor that, on a global level? Can you get an index for inflammation in America, inflammation in the Middle East, inflammation wherever there is violence and war? And then can we create technologies to not only measure that, electromagnetic fields, but inflammatory markers, and correlate those inflammatory markers with what's happening in society and in our biology. Our biology is inflamed. That's the number one cause of accelerated aging, of dementia, Alzheimer's, everything that is wrong with society. So as you were speaking right now, I think we should get CRP on everyone who comes to see you. We should get CRP before and after perfect health. Such a simple thing to do. And we should start monitoring this right now. CRP is C-reactive protein. It's one of the markers of inflammation. There are many, and we're still deciding which is the best. But that's the standard one.
Yeah, and there are many factors. Inflammation is multifactorial, and based on this concept of communication with the genes and what's being turned on and off, what hormones are high, like cortisol, when it's chronically elevated, can lead, again, to chronic inflammation. So our food interacts with our genes, our environment, toxins, that can all be certainly a physical cause for inflammation. And again, our thoughts and our emotions. And,
we can modulate that. We can be somewhat careful about what we eat, but I see lots of people who try to eat organic and clean and do all the best things they can, but we're living in a entangled world, and so the air and the water, and it's affected by everything around us. So we can do the best we can and control what we can, but definitely we can have somewhat control over our choices of our emotional state. When you notice yourself being inflamed or being how did you put it yesterday? An angry peace activist. To maybe shift that toward, shift that energy toward more love and compassion, and putting that energy toward things that will shift your physiology. And
Absolutely.
Probably people are on the other side of the globe, which is why we want to get 1 billion people meditating.
Correct. So this is very important, and I think 3 things that are overlooked that we don't, but we bring it up. One is sleep. Okay, so when you sleep, inflammation goes down, and also, think of the spaces between your neurons. They're like, let's say your brain is New York City, and the spaces between your neurons are the streets. So what happens during sleep is, instead of the scavengers coming at night or the street cleaners, the streets actually widen. The distance, spaces between the neurons widen, and all the amyloid and toxins that have been built up, they are flushed out of your brain, number 1. Number 2, inflammatory markers go down. So sleep is very effective way, good sleep, not sleep with alcohol or drugs or whatever. Second, meditation, obviously. We have all this proof now. And third is, and you have some inkling now with the grounding chairs outside, which you can use grounding devices, grounding mats, but you can also walk on the beach, or you can walk on the grass, or you can walk barefoot on the earth, not on cement, but on earth, and your body's electromagnetic fields will align with the earth, which is connected to everything else, the solar system and universe and all the other fields. So just by making contact, we were at the Silent Awakenings retreat, and the last day, Punacha, as usual, was showing all his technology, and we had this way to measure the connectivity of the field, and you can ask him to show it tomorrow with the technology also. So I actually was wearing shoes, but I was touching a tree, and the tree, of course, is connected to the earth, and the device could show that me, the tree, and the earth were now connected. But then if anybody touched me, they would also be connected, and if anybody touched them, and we had a chain of people, and as the device showed, the amplification of connectivity kept going up. And I wasn't even barefoot, I was just touching the tree with my hands. So now we have a new reason for hugging trees.
Absolutely. And bringing up sleep, I think it's just such a huge problem, because like you mentioned, this is good sleep, restorative sleep, natural sleep, which, and sometimes I know because I see people, and many of you I'm sure have trouble with good sleep, and sometimes even you can sleep for a certain number of hours and wake up not feeling rested. So there was a lot of activity, and you can check the nervous system and see sometimes you're in a little sympathetic nervous tone even during sleep. So it needs to be good restorative sleep, and that can include a daily meditation practice. I always recommend people do some breathing before sleep. There's different methods like journaling, earlier in the evening, to just sort of let go, not overstimulating yourself with, talking, thinking, electronics, etc., but creating a good sleep hygiene, process before you go to sleep, and then primarily not worrying about going to sleep. They've done studies of people that sometimes that's interfering more with sleep than anything, is the thought of, am I going to fall
Here's
asleep?
Here's a trick that works always, by the way. And, and this is a Fitbit, but I wear all kinds of devices because I love technology. But one of the ways these things, devices, monitor sleep is they're not actually measuring your brain waves. What they're measuring is muscle activity. Okay, so when you're in deep sleep, your muscles are paralyzed. Okay, when you're in the dream state, they are not paralyzed, but the muscle movement is very much finer. When you're fully awake, then of course we're moving most of the time, right? We're not never still. Even now you're sitting, you're shifting, etc. So these devices measure muscle activity, which then correlates with brain activity or sleep or wakefulness. So if you lie in bed observing your breath or the sensations in the body, but also at the same time be still, pretend that your body is paralyzed. Just pretend. The brain gets the message that it confuses that experience with sleep, because in sleep the muscles are paralyzed. Okay, so that's a very good way. And also, by the way, feeling the body and the sensations and the breath is another, it's almost vipassana. You're experiencing the body as an intermittent stream of sensations, and you don't move. It'll give you great insight into the idea that your body is just a modulation of your own consciousness. But if you're still and pretend you're paralyzing, and then there are mantras that one can use too, right?
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. And I think it's interesting you bring up also with, the body can send messages to the brain. I mean, it's constant communication. We used to think it was the brain controlling everything, but now we know there are, in the conversation of synchronicity, even with nature, these circadian rhythms and even clock genes. We're starting to have that conversation of
That's
clock genes.
That's a fascinating discussion already, that there are clock genes in every cell of your body that are monitoring the activity of the entire universe. That's not as far as the geneticists will go. They'll say they're monitoring the activity of the circadian rhythms. But the circadian rhythms are tied in to gravitational rhythms, lunar rhythms, seasonal rhythms. So I'm totally excited about this whole clock genes
it's fascinating.
idea.
Some of the initial, and again, it's the peripheral tissue, of the body that sometimes is telling the brain what signals to send based on these signals it's getting from the environment. And they, again, have a rhythm of their own. You can take certain tissue from the liver or other organs, put them in culture, and outside of the stimulation of light with the eyes and the brain telling them what to do, the genes will turn on and off at a essentially a 24-hour rhythm, even without the signals from the brain, because they have their own internal intelligence or, flow.
It's all one thing, awareness. It's all one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I found this little video this morning just on this epigenetics. It's just a minute, but you might like it. You can use it if you want.
I'm getting all my content from Sheila these days.
But it was good. It's a nice short little description of what you were showing too with your arm and how the proteins wrap around. And it gives us that sense of, I love what you say and I share it a lot, that we're an activity, we're a verb, we're not static at all, and nor is our DNA. And so it's just, I'm visual too. I like pictures and this visual representation.
Good way to remember. Every form is a phenomenon, and every phenomenon is an activity of formless being.
And it's just coming and going. Is it working? Okay, let's see if it works.
DNA contains the instructions for building all the parts of the body. But DNA is only half the story. The DNA in our bodies is wrapped around proteins called histones. Both the DNA and histones are covered with chemical tags. This second layer of structure is called the epigenome. The epigenome shapes the physical structure of the genome. It tightly wraps inactive genes, making them unreadable. It relaxes active genes, making them easily accessible. Different sets of genes are active in different cell types. The DNA code remains fixed for life, but the epigenome is flexible. Epigenetic tags react to signals from the outside world, such as diet and stress. The epigenome adjusts specific genes in our genomic landscape in response to our rapidly changing environment.
Thanks, Renee. So I think that's a nice short little video on
Beautiful.
just, showing us how consciousness is modulated in these different phenomenon, like you're saying, and it's constantly coming and going and coming and going. And the power of intention, in my opinion, is that we can influence that activity through meditation and accessing
also,
consciousness.
the four intentions we have for meditation: joyful, energetic body, loving, compassionate heart, reflective, alert mind, quiet mind, lightness of being. That kind of covers everything.
That's all you need to know.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah. So again, when you're meditating and you're asking those questions and you're setting those intentions, which is part of our meditation at the end, is communicating and, sending messages to your body, to your physiology, to that field of what you want to manifest. And so, the more aware you are of your thoughts and of your intentions, the more clear you are. And again, that's all the clarity we need, because ultimately our intentions, the goal of our intentions ultimately is to be happy. And the source of that is what Deepak mentioned with our four intentions, a loving, joyful, energetic body. That's what we're all wanting. Loving, compassionate heart, reflective, alert mind, and lightness of being. So that clarity of your intention then drives everything else.
Yeah, and this is the thing to understand. Instead of using words like body, mind, universe, objects, everything is an experience. We label those experiences as objects, body, mind, etc. So if you change the quality of your experience, you change everything. And experience broken into its raw components is sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, perceptions, and they're entangled. You change one, you change all of them. So your body is an experience, it's not a thing. If it was a thing, it would look the same forever. But it doesn't. It's it's an ongoing activity, it's an experience. Your mind is an experience. You experience thoughts. This universe is an experience. And what's in an experience of? Consciousness. You are consciousness experiencing itself as all this. And we can break it down, but ultimately even the experience is a modification or modulation or excitation or vritti of being. Changes the way we do science as well.
And many of the tools that we use as well, like in Ayurveda, which uses this Vedic wisdom as the foundation for this healing system, we talk about the senses, and of course the senses are the gateways to the mind, and using the senses, as you mentioned, sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, what's coming in through the senses, what are you looking at, what are you smelling, what images are you looking at, and how can you use your senses for healing as well. And again, all of these have to do with these choices we're making every day. Feelings, again, what feelings are you putting attention on, and then the thoughts, what thoughts. And oftentimes people don't realize we have a choice as to what we're thinking. We just go in these conditioned ways of thinking. But when you start to meditate and you create that space, you start to realize, oh, I can have any thought I want, or more importantly, new creative thoughts you've never had can start to come in. And so remember that SIFT, sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts.
So Ayurveda is qualia medicine. It's changing the qualities of awareness, because this thing that we call a body is just a modified form of awareness. And that's the beauty, that Ayurveda is in fact qualia medicine. And qualia, the word qualia, is the English word or Latin word for quality. Okay? So every experience we have is a quality of awareness. The color red is a qualia. A thought is a qualia. A sensation, a perception, a sound. So these are the, you may say, the vocabulary of consciousness as it becomes the world, as it becomes the universe. I was wondering if I should share a story, but go ahead.
No, share your story, please.
So, everything that we call the world is the qualia experience, right? So many years ago, I had read about this woman, Alexandra David Neal. I don't know, have you heard that name? So she was born in 1869 and she died in 1969 at the age of 101. And she was born in Paris, and she ran away from home at the age of 5 or 6 because she was a curious, adventurous child, and she used to run away every few years from home. And his parents would go all over the place, find her, bring her back, etc. And at the age of 19, she actually did leave home. She did all kinds of things. She was in theater, an actress, a musician, a poet, or whatever. And then she was the first woman to go to Tibet, and from the West. And she, learnt the language, and she learnt all the Tibetan qualia techniques. So if you've seen these mandalas, Tibetan mandalas, they're basically, each mandala describes a cosmos, cosmos of healing, cosmos of heavenly beings, cosmos of suffering beings. And these are also called bardos, which are hells and heavens that are part of the collective projection of consciousness. And so it's very intricate. When you do if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it actually goes through all these rituals. And people, when they're dying, if they're lucky, then their priests will initiate them and actually show them all the bardos or the lokas they can visit. But it's very complicated, and the Tibetans are experts in their qualia alchemy, if you want to call it that. So she was totally taken with look her up if you want on Wikipedia, Alexandra David Neal. Okay. She went and renewed her passport in Paris at the age of 100. She hadn't given up traveling. China, India, everywhere. So one of the techniques they had was they could collectively meditate into a qualia experience where they would all experience a Lama in manifestation. Okay. So we meditate and the Lama appears. Now you say, is that a perceptual trick? And the answer is, the whole universe is a perceptual trick, right? So it's on the same footing. So she was totally amazed at this hallucination, the Lama. And then she went back to Germany, to Austria, Brussels or somewhere. And then, when she was coming out from the grocery store or something, she'd see this lama around the corner. And, she would get scared because she had tried this as an experiment, And she said, now I can't get rid of this hallucination. But she would ignore it. Till one day, one of the neighbors said, who's this lama hanging around your house? So not only was she seeing it, but others were seeing the same apparition. And finally she had to go to Tibet and actually work with the lamas to ultimately get rid of this lama because it was scaring her. She has an amazing life, this woman, and on the way back from Asilomar, we actually downloaded an audio of her life. And it's just amazing what people have experienced and how the rest of the world has ignored because, it's a hallucination, it's a perceptual trick, etc. The whole thing is an hallucination. Okay, the whole thing is a perceptual alchemy. Okay, we're almost done, but Renee, there are 2 videos that I'd like to show this afternoon. One, and if you go on YouTube, you'll find them. They're both TED Talks. So one is a guy called Anil Seth, and his talk is about hallucinations or something like that. And the other is David Eagleman. He's a neuroscientist, and his is on multisensory experience. We'll show them because these guys are very close to the truth and yet very far from the truth. But it's interesting where science is going. We'll do that this afternoon. You should see this. Amazing.
All right, well, our time is up, so I guess I'll just leave you with this. You're going to be doing some activities on intention and just, again, enjoy the process and just remember that you are the universe, as Deepak teaches us. So enjoy the rest of the workshop.
Thank you.